My name is Eric, and I'm currently a trainee support manager working on the NHS graduate scheme.
I'm Emma Woods, and I'm the Director of People for University Hospitals, Bristol and Weston.
What attracted you to work with the NHS?
I came into the NHS actually having been in the police sector immediately before the NHS. So I was the Director of HR for Avon and Somerset Constabulary. And when I changed that job, I went to South West Ambulance. And I'll be honest, the attraction to go into the ambulance sector was to stick with emergency services. When I joined South West Ambulance, there was less about it being a 999 emergency service and far more about it being about the patients and about, what the paramedics do in terms of clinically assessing and looking after people who are incredibly vulnerable. You're incredibly vulnerable when you ring 999. So that was the reason why I went into the ambulance sector. But I soon realised that, the ambulance sector was far more NHS than it was emergency services. And I started to really love the fact that I was working for my local ambulance service, and actually the service was treating people, that were dear to me, and the pride that I had in that, and the awe I had in people that, came to my father when he had chest pains, and came to my father-in-law when he had a stroke. And the paramedics that conveyed my father-in-law to hospital saved his life. And why wouldn't you want to work for an organisation filled with people that want to make people feel better? The other piece for me as well was that I had been a patient of the NHS for years. The NHS, I went into an emergency department in Northern Ireland 15, 16 years ago, and I was immediately put into critical care, and there was a few days where they thought I was going to die, and I didn't. So actually, here I am. I might not be the perfectly fit individual I would like to be, but that's not because of my care. That's just because of my condition. That's just because, that was my outcome. So being part of the NHS that gives so much has been the reason why I've stayed in the NHS. So I moved from South West Ambulance into Gloucestershire Hospitals, which was my first time working in an acute provider. And that role was amazing for me because it was my first step into that sector. I also had the Deputy Chief Exec portfolio, which I absolutely loved. And then my step into UHBW is again that real link to community. So I loved working at Gloucestershire Hospitals, but it wasn't my local hospitals because I'm in Somerset. I'm in a little town called Burnham-on-Sea. Weston is my local hospital. I've been treated in Weston when I've been unwell. I've had family and friends that are in that hospital when they've been unwell. So it was that real sense of wanting to get back into a local service, and one that I'm really proud of. I'm immensely proud to work in the NHS. I don't have the talent, I probably don't have the patience to be a clinician or a support worker in a clinical setting, or a physio, or any of those amazing people that make up that patient-facing part of our world, but I'm in awe of everything that they do. And if I can help to make their experience of work better, then I fundamentally believe that I'm helping the patient. And that patient could be me, or it could be my kids, and it could be my family. So that's why I sort of joined the NHS, and why I'm determined to stay in the NHS until I retire. So just a few more years.
I'm interested in hearing a bit more about your role and what talents you feel you use in your current role.
Part of my role is about being that functional expert. So there is a bit about, in my role, I am the technical expert for people, which means the education that I've had through the years, through my professional programs of work in HR are definitely something I pull upon quite regularly. You know, people will come to me to say, I've got this problem, what can we do? And it's, you know, the education and frankly, you know, my years of experience that give me a view around, you know, what are our options and what might we do about, you know, whatever the problem is. But I probably think my technical expertise, if I call that, I probably use for about 15% of the time. I think the rest of the time, I don't like to think of myself as talented, but if I use your language, my talents are around things like how I communicate, how I negotiate, how I influence, how I coach, how I enable people to be the best that they can. How I provocate. So I think, you know, I can be quite provocative at times and be asking people the why questions. So why do you do that? What's the reasons behind it? What could we do differently? So I think probably I spend more time in a sort of facilitation mode in my career. And that's probably been the talent that I've had to hone most as well. Is that bit about how do I facilitate versus how do I provide direction? So there are people that like to be told what to do, but actually it's far more empowering for people if they work out their own sort of solutions. And that's probably why I enjoyed having my own coach. And then last year I was really lucky enough to be selected by the Southwest Leadership Academy to do an executive coaching ILM level 7 course with about 6 or 7 other executives across the Southwest. And that was brilliant, because for me, in all of those things I've described, being a better coach would probably make me a bit more of a talented person, I think, because that's my development need is how do I coach people to find their own solutions, rather than how do I use that technical expertise I've got and the years of experience I've got to say, oh, I've done this, you know, I did this 5 years ago, I did this 6 years ago, I've had this situation 20 times, this is what you need to do. And I think progressing my personal talent in terms of that sort of coaching, enabling, facilitating has probably been my biggest development need, but probably will be my best talent if I can crack it, Eric, if I can crack doing that.
You talked about going around the wards and meeting colleagues. It does make me think what you find the most rewarding and meaningful in your current role, because you will have interactions with a lot of different stakeholders. Do you get to interact with patients as well? How does that feed into your kind of sense of purpose at work?
Yeah, I very rarely at the moment interface with patients, and it's probably more about the COVID piece than anything else. So I will, as you say, I'll go and see colleagues and staff when they're working on wards, but I don't tend to speak to patients directly, and there's probably a couple of reasons for that. The first is that when COVID broke 2 years ago, I was put on the shielding list because of my health vulnerability. So I sort of didn't see anything other than my 4 walls for like 4 months. So there's part of me that I'm still really mindful when I'm in patient areas about where am I, because I'm still concerned, you know, about the impact that having COVID would have for me personally because of my health vulnerability. So I've probably done less patient-facing stuff than I have ever done before. But for me, I think it's really important that I can connect the dots between the things that we do for colleagues which impact patients.